Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Nasdaq Amplify's Issuer Spotlight, where we feature conversations with leaders of some of the world's most innovative and growth-oriented small-cap companies. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Melsert, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Technology, a dual threat and Chief Technology Officer of Nasdaq-listed American Battery Technology Company.
Yes,
Ryan,
great to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. So can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, we at American Battery Technology Company are working to solve the domestic critical battery material challenge. So right now in the US, we have dozens of electric vehicle factories under construction, dozens electric battery factories under construction, but upstream of that, there's almost no capacity within the US. So all of those domestically made plants are having to source their materials almost 100% from abroad. That's giving us security of battery material supply chain risk. It makes for more expensive materials, and it results in a much higher environmental footprint than if we actually make those materials domestically.
So can you talk a little bit about the current battery recycling ecosystem and how your approach is different, both in the context of sustainable resource management and economic viability?
Yeah, so again, right now there are over 20 very large battery gigafactories under construction, but there are currently 0 commercial scale battery recycling plants in the US. And in order to make a true closed loop economy, you eventually need the throughput of all recycling plants to equal the throughput of all manufacturing plants. So myself and much of the team we've hired, we really come from the background of designing and manufacturing batteries themselves. Many of us were part of the founding team that helped design and build the Tesla Gigafactory outside of Reno. And by taking those years of fundamental understanding of how to go through every single processing step of how you go from raw materials to final products, whereas most recyclers today come from the general metal recycling business, we've instead designed a system that we call demanufacturing, where we essentially take many of the same techniques we designed in the building of gigafactories and are now able to run those in reverse order. So a much more strategic and systematic method of demanufacturing batteries, which lets us recover a far greater amount of the materials and to do so at lower cost.
So what are the technological challenges that need to be addressed in order to make material recycling more mainstream and efficient?
Right now, the fact that there's so many varieties of batteries out there, from electric vehicles, consumer electronics, grid scale battery storage systems, they all have different form factors, they all have different chemistries. You need to have a process that is really agnostic and can take in a wide breadth of material. And a lot of traditional recycling plants just go after a couple token elemental metals that are very high value. So if you design a plant that just recovers nickel or cobalt or copper, which represents less than 20% of a battery by mass, it may be enough to start, but it really isn't the type of holistic design that we really need to make a closed loop economy going forward. So we've intentionally designed a system that recovers a far greater quantity of materials to actually return them back to the battery market.
And we've undoubtedly seen a rise in consumer demand for EV. So how does that impact the battery metals industry?
Extreme demand in the US and abroad. I mentioned over 20 battery plants under construction right now, about of similar size to the Tesla Gigafactory outside of Reno. Dramatic demand. Right now, we are supply limited. And again, large factories, to build vehicles and cells. But the limiting factor really is how to source those materials, how to do it at low cost, how to do it domestically, how to do it at low impact. And we really do see there is a demand from the final customer to have recycled content, to have domestic content. So we're working to scale up 2 commercial scale factories right now, one for our battery recycling division and one for a different type of process we've developed, where we can actually manufacture a battery grade lithium product from a Nevada-based resource that we own in Central Nevada.
And obviously with the growing demand for EVs, we've seen a lot of automakers try to enter that market. So do you see a scenario where those automakers become miners and try to go out and source the materials themselves?
For the automakers, it's just so critical for them to have access to this material. They can't simply rely on contracts. So we've seen a lot of instances where they make minority investments in the mining and refining sector. I think we'll see a lot more of that because they have a real stake in it. It's the automakers, it's the cell manufacturers, and it's a lot of the material refiners. So just a few months ago, we did announce that, BASF, the largest chemical company in the world, and us formed a strategic partnership, really to help ramp up battery recycling in the US, where we receive a lot of material from the market, we recycle it in our ABAT facilities, and we sell it directly back to BASF for them to make into final products and then to sell in the domestic market. So we really are working to make a closed loop economy, specifically in North America itself.
So on that same page, are automakers still reliant on foreign production for the most part?
For the battery materials, it's almost 100% imported. So that does have those risks to it. I think they do understand those risks. If we ever had another type of supply chain shutdown like we had during COVID, all those materials would be stranded. We would have these 20 plus multi-billion-dollar factories that couldn't get access to their own feedstock. So it's very risky to have all this capacity built in the US and to not be able to source your feedstock domestically.
What are the benefits to sourcing in the US?
Security of supply really is number one. Really the fact that you have access to your feed material, you know where it's coming from, you know the environmental impact it had, and you can have it for much lower cost generally. Many countries right now are actually imposing export tariffs, charging fees on exporting critical materials from their countries that automakers in the US are now subject to.
You actually answered my next question. I was going to ask you about any regulatory changes. So that's happening in the US now too, or is that on the horizon?
Well, there's the carrot and the stick side. So a lot of other countries are using the stick essentially to charge tariffs exporting materials, whereas the US has more the carrot side so far, rewarding and incentivizing companies to produce materials within country. So about 2 years ago, the US government passed the infrastructure bill, and then 1 year ago passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Both of those provide dramatic amounts of funds to help scale up facilities domestically to help address these challenges. So we as American Battery Technology Company are fortunate enough to have won 4 of these Department of Energy grants over the past few years that have really helped us support our bench work 2 years ago, and now construction and commercialization of our 2 plants as we go forward here.
How does the fluctuation in global commodity prices affect your strategy? Or does it?
There are short-term and long-term fluctuations. The short-term don't have a huge impact on our business strategy. We keep coming back to the fact that if there are over 20 multi-billion-dollar factories under construction, which have built-in demand for the products that we make, as those come online in 2025 and 2026, huge increase in domestic demand that there isn't a viable pathway of providing all that supply from right now. So over the longer term, we do see supply being a much more limiting factor than demand, which should support prices in the longer term.
Right. So we're here at Nasdaq, and you just successfully completed an uplist and are now trading on Nasdaq under the symbol ABAT. So what role will the public markets play in advancing your mission, and what does Nasdaq represent to you?
It's definitely an exciting time. I mean, this really is an enabler for us to move forward. Over the past few years, we have bench and pilot scale operations. We spoke with many institutional investors who wanted to get on board, who wanted to be a part of helping us grow, but were really held back until we were on a premier exchange like the Nasdaq. So over the past few weeks, we've been re-engaging with them, and it's more of just a swell of support that's been built up the past few years. And we're excited to be part of the Nasdaq community now to really help implement this as we go forward.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you here. And you briefly mentioned the grant, but I saw something cool. You recently got to visit the White House and meet President Biden, right?
He did announce one of our grants in person, yes. He was.
What was that experience like?
It was exciting. He actually was pretty well informed about why we were doing this, what it really means to the country. I think he understood the difference between building large quantities of something versus having innovation-driven growth. I think he mentioned that the US is really built on an innovation economy, being the tip of the spear, helping bring new technologies to the market, and that the federal government was happy to help support this as we move forward with this first-of-kind facility, as opposed to investing in legacy technologies and doubling down on the past.
I think that's a great place to leave it. If you want to learn more about American Battery Technology Company, you can now check them out. They're now trading on Nasdaq under the ticker symbol ABAT. Thank you so much for being here, Ryan, and thank you for watching.